The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Contained herein are the heresies of Radolf Buntwine, erstwhile monk turned traveling medical investigator. Join me as I study the secrets of the divine plagues and uncover the blasphemous truth that ours is not a loving God, and we are not its favored children. The heresies of Radolf Buntwine, wherever podcasts are available.
Hello, and welcome to Vulgar History, Feminist Women's History Comedy Podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and this is part 5 of There's Something About Mary Queen of Scots. Well, I mean, the whole season is that, but this is Mary's story, part 5. And here's what is LOL about that. I originally thought I could tell her whole story in 4 episodes. Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha. Yeah, we're on episode 5, and we're just getting to this. So anyway, I don't know if you can hear this in the background, but I'm joined by my cat, whose name is Hepburn, and I think she's just here to be like, I would like to remove myself from the narrative of Bothwell, the Earl, like James Hepburn, that is not my family. She's like, I'm not from Scotland. Like, we know that, Hepburn, we know. But I'm also joined by a human who is Alison Epstein.
Hello, also not related to Bothwell, also not from Scotland. Also happy to be here.
Yeah, so last time Alison joined us because we were talking about a person who is one of your most hated historical figures. Yeah, Darnley?
He is certainly top 10. Some days he's top 5. It varies based on the weather, but yeah, way, way, way up there.
His overall, just I think British people say gormless. Like he changes sides so easily. He like doesn't have any principles other than just he thinks he's great. He would sell his mother out to get money to gamble with. Like he's just like a shitty ass person. There's no redeeming qualities. Maybe his handsomeness, but
maybe. But there are other people in this era who were handsome
yeah.
and are not. Like this, he reminds me of the John Mulaney joke where you have the moral backbone of a chocolate eclair. That's Darnley. He's just like a bowl of porridge that showed up to betray his mother. It's like the worst.
He's like, and when you contrast him with someone who's like a good person, like a solid person, a person with loyalties, like Davy Rizzio, tortoise of my heart.
I know. Just makes it so much more obvious how terrible he was. And all he ever wanted was like, hey, but can we have sex now?
Oh my God.
The selfishness and the absolute dickheadedness of it all.
So last episode, we're recording these sequentially. So I feel like you all know what happened last episode. It literally just happened. But it's like, no, for people, it's been a week. But I mean, a lot happened last episode. But big thing that happened last episode was that Darnley teamed up with Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, some other dudes, to
200 other people.
a Douglas, and they to murder Davy Rizzio, Tortoise of My Heart. And they did in the most clumsy, ill-prepared, badly planned way. Like they did murder him, but they didn't get any of the other goals they wanted, which were like to usurp control, make Darnley the king, make Darnley their puppet king, and take over the country. In fact,
And also it was 200 to 12, so if they hadn't murdered him, it would have been really, really, really sad.
yeah. So what Mary was able to escape by manipulating her eclair filling of a husband to switch sides to her team. And then she got the help of like people who have had her back till now. I don't mean to say that ominously. It's just like people who've like had her back. Like Rizzio is now dead, but so the people who are still loyal to her are like, we've got Bothwell and we've got Cock o' the North Jr. are both on her side. There was a clutch assist from the Countess, though. She was smuggling letters in pea chamber pots, like outstanding
It
work.
was the classic scheme happening in the ladies' room. It was delightful.
It was great.
That's why women don't go to the bathroom alone, is because sometimes we're trying to scheme our way out of prison.
So that last week's episode ended in triumph, basically, because as we've talked about, like one of the things that Mary very cannily did is she won the love of the people of Scotland. So even though like all these Protestant assholes and like AKA her Privy Council all hate her, all of Parliament, but the people, the everyday people love her and support her, and they got her back into power. And last episode ended with her triumphantly re-entering Edinburgh for, I feel like, the third time in this podcast series. She just keeps re-entering Edinburgh in triumph, and her haters are just like, ugh, again. Like the other thing that I guess I'll just mention is that Darnley had been on the side of the Rizzio murderers, but then he switched over to support Mary. And you know who's mad about that are the Rizzio murderers. A group of people who we know are prone to making a convoluted but successful murder plot. So now that they all hate Darnley, we'll see where that all goes. Oh, and one thing that I brought up last time and I wanted to just clarify. So one of the books that I was looking at was called David Rizzio and Mary Queen of Scots, Murder at Holyrood by David Tweedy. And I mentioned that David Tweedy's ancestors are notable, and they are. Well, actually, first, he is Sir David Tweedy. And secondly, his ancestors were among the Rizzio murderers. Their names are on those pieces of paper. So I appreciate that he, knowing that those are his ancestors, wrote this very sympathetic and very complete biography of Davy Rizzio. I find that very touching, actually. So the references for this episode: Daughters of the North, Jean Gordon and Mary Queen of Scots by Jennifer Morrick Henderson, Embroidering Her Truth, Mary Queen of Scots and the Language of Power by Claire Hunter, Mary Queen of Scots and, okay, like skip ahead 30 seconds if you don't want some spoilers, and The Murder of Lord Darnley by Alison Weir. Mary Queen of Scots' Downfall, The Life and Murder of Henry Lord Darnley by Robert Stidell, and Mary Queen of Scots, The True Life of Mary Stuart by John Guy. Yeah, so the two shining stars supporting Mary through all of this extreme. She's still pregnant. She hasn't had her baby yet. Like
she's been pregnant for the last probably 90 minutes. Anne and I have been recording, and I'm just like, this baby, oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, but the two, now the Rizzio, like again, R.I.P. Rizzio is dead. The two people who have her back and the two people who like actively helped her escape all of this were Bothwell and Cock o' the North Jr. So we mentioned this before, but here's the timeline of this all. Like 2 weeks before the Davy Rizzio murder extravaganza, Bothwell had married Cock o' the North Jr.'s sister, Jean Gordon. And we know Mary loves weddings, so our girl was there honoring her two best supporters as they kind of came together, joined their families. So the Davy Rizzio murder happened, but the alliance between like Bothwell's family, like the Hepburns, and Cock o' the North Jr., like the Gordons, was still going strong. Her two best guys, and they're getting along with each other, and they're supporting her. They're eating scrambled eggs. Things are good.
5 a.m.
Yeah. So really, in an interesting way where it's like at first, there was with the chase boat raids and stuff, like things were sort of like extreme and high key for a while. But now I think Mary even is just kind of like, okay, this is how things just are in Scotland. Like revolutions happen, then you have some eggs and you all meet up at Parliament the next day and things were like weirdly okay.
It doesn't seem like they would be after what we just talked about, the whole stabbing her best friend 56 times after throwing his body down the stairs, but, like, I guess we're just gonna get back to business because someone's gotta rule Scotland.
Exactly. So Mary learned that Darnley's father, Lennox, had been complicit/involved in the Davy Rizzio murder in order to get Darnley the crown matrimonial. So she banished him from court, but she couldn't banish Darnley because he was her baby daddy. Like, he had to be around for the birth of the child, for the christening of the child, so there's no doubt in anyone's mind that like he is the father of this child, right? So regrettably, he had to be there. So the conspirators had mostly escaped. Once they knew that they had lost, they fled. Like while she was like en route to Edinburgh in triumph, like they were actively fleeing. So only 2 minor figures were caught, tried, convicted, and hanged for the crime. Oh, sorry. Caught, tried, convicted, hanged, drawn, and quartered. Their severed parts put on display around town.
So they went for the whole production.
Yeah, so that of the like 500 people, two people took the fall for that. Mary made Darnley make an apology, which he hated. So his apology was like, I didn't know anything about anything. All I thought was I was going to help Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart and his friends get their land back. Didn't know anything about any murder. And this made the assholes, like the murderers, so mad that they sent Mary a copy of the document that he signed being like, I, Darnley, agreed to help kill Davy Rizzio. So anyway, the paperwork of it all just really, it's hard to hide what you're up to when everything is in paper. And we know a lot of the details that we do know about what happened with the murder and what happened after because Mary herself wrote them in a letter to her ambassador in Paris. So 6 days after the murder, she wrote this letter, but she sent it to him wanting him to share it with other Catholics across, like in Spain and at the Vatican and in France. It was published in the Netherlands, is a note I have. Was that like where the printing press existed, the only one in Europe? I don't know.
I feel like the Netherlands were, like, a center of both, like, trades you could get a lot of places easily, but also, like, kind of a Catholic center hold that maybe she wasn't as politically connected to, but I think Gutenberg was German. I don't know Germany. We'll have to ask Lena.
I don't know Germany either. All I know about the Netherlands is that is where my artist friend Jan Pater, who does some of my merch, lives. So it's a cool place. Anyway, so this friend, he translated her letter into Latin, published it in the Netherlands. And so basically, in short order, anyone in Europe who could read Latin heard her version of what had happened that night.
And we love someone who will control the narrative. You know what? Good for her.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's no way that this was gonna, no one ever thought she was complicit in that at all. Meanwhile, Darnley is just kind of like living in his dream world. He was also writing letters. He wrote letters to Catherine de' Medici in France.
Can you imagine Catherine de' Medici sitting at her breakfast table, sipping her Italian coffee, opening up a letter written by Henry Stuart Lord Darnley, and she's just like, "This absolute muppet has written me,
Yeah.
Catherine." I just, boy, the fact that they lived at the same time is insane to me.
It's ridiculous. The fact he wrote her a letter and he was like, hey, it's me, the King of Scotland. And he's like, I'm innocent. I had nothing to do with that murder. And like, let's all be Catholics together and like work together. He also wrote to Philip of Spain, like the Philip. He also wrote to the Pope. And in his letters, it's just like a guy losing his mind on Reddit. Like he's just complaining like Scotland is falling to pieces. It should be a Catholic country, but it's not. And it's all Mary's fault. He also developed these like categorically ridiculous plans to invade England by landing Catholic armies on these like random islands that England controlled. One of them is called Scilly. And it's funny, I just saw it yesterday. Someone was tweeting that that's like Prince William and Kate Middleton and their family like to go to holiday on this place, Scilly, which is this kind of like island owned by England, but it's sort of tropical adjacent. And I was like, Scilly? Well, that's the place why Darnley insanely wanted to invade from. So anyway, still controlled by England, apparently.
Okay.
Anyway, he was losing his mind. None of his plans made any sense. And yeah.
He was not brought into this equation for his plans and his scheming skills. He was brought in as a terrible bad decision that kind of happened, but no one ever thought he was gonna be the man with the plan.
No, but no one ever thought that he was going to be actively this. Who would have ever thought that any human being could be this awful? Anyway, meanwhile, back in England, like Sir Richard Attenborough from Jurassic Park, William Cecil, he knew all about everything because his spies were everywhere and everyone was
And because
writing everything on
everyone was
paper.
writing him letters in triplicate with, like,
Yeah.
signed and notarized things.
So he tried to trick Mary into doing a treason herself by sending a spy called Rokesby up to Scotland. And Rokesby was like, oh, hey, what if we invade England? You know, being a Catholic is great, right? And Mary saw right through it. And also, she was like, at this point, 8 months pregnant, and she's not about to put her relationship with Elizabeth/England in any danger. Because remember, her goal at this point is still to be named Elizabeth's heir. She's not going to like invade England. Anyway, so she saw Rokesby did this, and then Mary wrote a great letter back to Cecil being like, oh, hey, so this guy told me this weird stuff. And it's very like heavy handed and like subtextual. It's like, I know what you're up to, you piece of shit. Like, if you don't stop like fucking around with me, I'm going to tell Elizabeth you did this. She won't like it. Like it's a strongly worded letter. I admire it. It's strongly worded, yeah, but polite.
This might have worked on my dumbass husband, but you gotta get up earlier in the morning to fool me, Mary.
But also, so she was also getting ready to go to have her baby. And in this period of time, a couple of things. Firstly, like as it is now, but childbirth is a dangerous thing, right? So also she's just like, as far as they knew, it's just like sometimes women die in childbirth. We don't know why or who or what makes that happen or not. So she's like, I might die, but she's also like, also when you have a baby, you go into confinement for months afterwards, which is more maternity leave than you get in the United States. But
Sure is.
but in her case, that meant that she would be away from everything for a month. And she's like, someone could do a coup. Like, I need to like get everything in line because I'm going to either die or just be tucked away in a room for a month. And like, I need to still be queen after that if I'm alive. So she went to go to Edinburgh Castle, which was because she's usually at Holyrood. Although I feel like the memory, like personally, I would not want to live at Holyrood anymore, having seen my best friend stabbed 56 times in front of me.
The blood would still be there 5 centuries later. It
The
seems like you don't wanna
blood, the
move.
haunted ghost blood. So she went to Edinburgh Castle, which was like more secure. Anyway, so she wrote a detailed will beforehand, including she said that she wanted to give the tortoise, the jeweled tortoise that Davy had given her. She bequeathed that to Joseph Rizzio. That's right, Davy's 19-year-old brother. She'd invited him to town, and what did she do? Made him her new private secretary.
Can you imagine the 200 people who had just gone through the most convoluted stabbing of all time being like, "And now there's another one."
Yeah, yeah. I love that detail. I did not know that detail until I was doing this research, and I'm like, also, I love that she bequeathed the tortoise to him. And so
Mhm.
she like wrote this list of like what jewel to give to who, and there's all these like secret, like not cipher, not code. Like she wrote in code as well, and we'll talk about that later. But she just kind of has these messages along the side. She's like, you know what I mean, or like, do with it what we talked about. So she told him, I want to bequeath this jeweled tortoise to you, Joseph Rizzio. Do with it as we discussed. So like,
Ooh, so
is it a
sneaky.
key to a secret treasure map? Or was she just like, whatever, sell this and start up a trust fund for the Rizzio family? I don't know. Anyway, but I appreciate that
With
she,
Mary, either one is possible.
yeah. And then she also, at this point, another jewel I just wanted to mention was there was a mermaid shaped jewel that, oh, I know that she bequeathed it to Bothwell. I forget if he had given it to her in the first place, but like mermaid was clearly like a shared thing between them, the way that owl is with you and your friend. So there was a mermaid shaped jewel that she was bequeathing to Bothwell as well. Anyway, so time for her lying in period. So there's a series of rituals happen. Like Catholicism is sometimes indistinguishable from just like ritual druid pagan stuff, where it's like there's a torchlight procession and people are walking and then they process into her bedchamber. And like it's a whole thing.
Love a ritual.
Yeah, no, I love a torchlight procession. So anyway, the windows were covered in dark cloth in the room that she would be in because people thought that light was harmful for childbirth. You know what? I don't know. Maybe it is. Anyway, so she would just stay sequestered there until the baby was born, and then for 1 month later, and she would only be attended by women, which I feel like of all the people in the story, she's never been betrayed by any of her women, like the Countess was there for her in a clutch moment. The Marys always there for her. So I think she could feel as safe as possible knowing that the women were around her, although understandably paranoid. And so she got whatever, quadrupled the amount of guards who were around her. And she got a guy named the Earl of Argyll, who she trusted to move into the room outside and to stay there night and day, so that she always had sort of a personal bodyguard there. Because the whole Davy Rizzio thing, she understandably thought they were going to maybe also kill her. That might have been an attempted assassination. Because they pointed a gun at her pregnant belly and fired it, she thought maybe they wanted to kill her. So she is worried for her own safety. Okay, so she gave birth, and this is a detail I added at the last minute because I was contacted by a recent fan of the podcast who turns out to be descended from someone who was there at the birth. And so one of the people who was at the birth was named Margaret Fleming. So she's the Countess of Argyll, I presume married to the guy who's called Argyll, who's like the bodyguard. But Margaret Fleming is the sister of Mary Fleming, who's one of the four Marys. She's also the daughter of Janet Fleming, Mary's governess, who ended up getting pregnant by the French king and got kicked back to Scotland, if you will remember back in episode 1. Anyway, so the Fleming family, full of scandal. Margaret was also a witch.
Yes.
She was brought in an attempt to transfer Mary's labor pains onto the wet nurse.
Man, that sucks to be the wet nurse. Rude.
Yeah, but you know what? Did not work. But, she's brought in to maybe try to do that. I think I'm going to talk more about Margaret Fleming later, but here's what's interesting. So after a prolonged and difficult labor, Mary gave birth to a son who she named James after every other man in this story, but specifically her father and grandfather. We're going to call him Baby Jamie or BJ. But later on, he becomes King James I/6th, who is the husband of Anne of Denmark. I did a whole episode about that. He's the famous, I don't know, Alison, can you give a précis on his deal?
King James is the King James of the King James Bible. He is the responsible for most of the witch burnings that happened in England at this point. He was kind of a wacky, eccentric man who hated women and black magic and just made a mess of things in England. He was a lot.
So I love that you mentioned the witch cuff because don't you find it interesting? There was a witch present at his birth.
And I bet he hated that every day of his life.
Here's the thing. So Margaret Fleming, she lived a long life after this. And even when James became king and he was witch burning and witch hunting and whatever, he never went after Margaret Fleming because she had been present at his birth, and that would put his birth into question if he accused her of being a witch.
It's what he deserves, really.
So I appreciate that for her. And we're going to talk more about Margaret Fleming in a later episode, I think. Now that I know that she exists, I'm excited to learn more about her. Anyway, but it was a son. Not just having a baby, but having a son was what everybody wanted. So her popularity increased in Scotland. And even in England, people were like, oh my God, a woman who's married and has a child, we like that better than our weird spinster lady queen called Elizabeth. So more people were kind of we prefer her as queen because she's doing the things we expect women to do, having sons. But also people are just excited for a royal baby. 500 bonfires were lit in Edinburgh and its suburbs. People in Edinburgh, I talked in a previous one, fireworks were a thing, bonfires were a thing. People just figuring out what you can do with fire and with gunpowder in a interesting way in this era, she says, portentously. Anyway, the guns of Edinburgh Castle were fired. People broke out into spontaneous rejoicing. It was a happy thing. But Mary, she's always had health issues, right? So, not just how would the hormones maybe trigger her potential porphyria or whatever her chronic illness was, but she had this birth that was challenging, and she had just watched her best friend be murdered in front of her.
Yeah, it's been a hard couple of months.
Yeah, exactly. So in July, so she stayed in the room for a month, and it's you know what? You know who deserves a month-long nap is this lady. So she left her birthing chamber and went on holiday. So, and when I say she went on holiday, this is kind of like an Empress Sisi thing where it's just she's very sick and is going somewhere else to go lie down sort of holiday. But maybe, the same as when the doctors were saying like, "Oh no, if she doesn't get fresh air, she'll have a miscarriage." Like I think she just needed fresh air and like get away and just away from the like city where her best friend had just been stabbed in front of her and she was almost betrayed and murdered by those closest to her.
Yeah, I mean, being surrounded by people who you can't trust 100% of the time with a newborn baby, like, the stress of that, even if you don't have existing health issues, that's not gonna be good for you in your recovery anyway.
No, and these are the things I want us to keep in mind when people are like, "Oh, Mary, she wasn't a strong queen or whatever." It's like, "Okay, let's see how you would do in this situation." Like, let's see how if we want to compare them, like how would Elizabeth have done in this situation? Like, no one could have done better than what she had done. Like, she just used her smarts and her wiles to like undo a coup,
Yep.
and now she just had a baby. So anyway,
I feel like the reason people don't give Mary enough credit for, like, her scheminess and her, like, cleverness is because the things that she schemed worked, and so the disasters that she avoided never happened. Like, if there was a coup and she had to, like, scheme her way back to the throne, we'd be like, "Oh, look at this clever queen," but because she was so good at it, she stopped these things before they became dramatic, and now we're just like, "It looks like she didn't do that much." But she was good at it.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Like some of like I mentioned all the books that I've read, and I don't want to throw any shade to any of the books I've read, but they all have a different point of view. And some of them propose that Darnley himself decided to escape. Mary didn't have to coerce or manipulate him into doing that, which I think is incorrect. I don't think Darnley was like, "Oh no, my number's up, like I'll just escape with Mary." No, she got him to do that. Clearly. Darnley.
Yeah, we've discussed already Darnley's common sense is not a thing he was known for. He was never gonna think one step ahead, let alone
No,
2.
exactly. So people even in that, like people just often historians don't want to give her credit where I think credit is due. So that's where I appreciate, especially people who, well, I appreciate everyone who's listening to this, but people who've never heard this story before aren't coming in with the pre existing understanding of like, oh, she's just this poor victim who never did anything. It's like, no, to those people, she's like a woman who, with a plan, who is just like succeeding, basically. So remember that. Anyway, so she went on holiday to this place, and because, okay, I find it startling, but she has forgiven Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart by this point. You might think how and why, but it's like there's not a lot. To make anything function, she couldn't stay mad at everybody all the time. And remember when she was captive, he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and he was like out of town when it happened. So she didn't know directly how much he was involved, maybe, but she knew that he was influential and she had to keep him on side. So anyway, they're in the good books again, apparently. Bothwell also went with her on this holiday trip, along with lots of other people. Darnley did not go on this trip because he was too busy saying, like, I'm going to run away to the Netherlands, and just being like, isn't anyone going to stop me? No?
No, please leave. Please. Go, go.
He wasn't invited, but then when he found out that she was going on holiday without him, he crashed the party long enough to get in a yelling fight with Mary in front of witnesses. Can you guess? I'm going to give you one guess what he was demanding from her.
Well, I have 2 guesses, and it's either sex or the crown matrimonial. I don't remember which one it was this time.
It was sex. He was just like, why won't you have sex with me? You just gave birth a month ago in Renaissance Scotland. Your friend was just killed. You have a chronic disease and you're actively convalescing. Why won't you have sex with me? So he got in a fight, and everyone who saw it was just like, this fucking guy. So it's no secret that he's the worst. He was also planning to kidnap their son so that he could then rule as regent in his name or something.
Not the first child kidnapping in this season, probably also not the last.
No. So he's just come up with various plans. Mary found out that someone was going to try and kidnap BJ, someone named Darnley. So she moved the baby to Stirling Castle, which again is just kind of like I guess Edinburgh Castle is more secure than Holyrood, but Stirling is like the most secure. That's where her mother took her when she was at risk of being baby kidnapped as well. Because it's like on a cliff, it's like hard to get to. Anyway, to make this trip, she raised Mary. She got 50 musketeers to surround the carriage as they went to make sure that the baby wasn't kidnapped. 500. 500 musketeers.
That's so many musketeers.
That's so many. It's so many. Anyway, so she went there and he wasn't kidnapped. So it was probably good. Again, that was a good choice. If she hadn't done that, maybe he would have been kidnapped and we'd be like, she's so dumb. So she left him there and then went to resume her like quote unquote holiday. And And this is normal, like to leave babies with wet nurses and whatever, but also she just needed to get herself better to like get back in queen shape. So by September, she was slowly forgiving more and more of the Rizzio conspirators because otherwise she wouldn't have anyone in her parliament.
Right. If the alternative is go to war with the entire government, eventually you're going to have to be like, okay,
Yeah, right. So like first she like forgave Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart. Then she forgave Scottish Machiavelli, who came to return to his position. Darnley was furious about that. She thought that she was reconciling with these guys to build consensus against him because they all hated him because he betrayed them.
Actually, everybody hates you, Darnley. It would be really hard to put someone in government that doesn't hate you.
Yeah, like there is a consensus of everyone hates you. She doesn't have to do anything to make that consensus happen. So then everything he did, like he's messy bitch, lives for drama, but he like does everything. It's a real sort of like reality star. I don't know. I'm just going to throw out Vanderpump Rules. I don't know. But like everything he did that was shocking, he made sure he did it in front of witnesses. Like he always did everything publicly. He wanted to shock people. So he announced in front of witnesses that he planned to separate from her and go live abroad. I guess.
And Mary's like, oh, thank God.
She was not, because everyone is like, no, like they needed him to stay because like at least like Darnley in the wild, who knows what he would get up to, but at least in Scotland, like they could keep an eye on him. So they wanted to keep him in Scotland.
Yeah.
Not that they wanted him around, but like he was maybe more of a wild card danger if he went to whatever, Netherlands. So remember he had written to Catherine de Medici. So the Privy Council also wrote to Catherine de Medici saying like, hi, Darnley is insane. Please, if he comes to France to start up his own like kangaroo court, don't support him. He is insane. And I'm sure Catherine was like,
Catherine's like, noted.
I kind of figured that out, but thanks for the heads up. So anyway, so then Mary, she's feeling better, I guess. Like, I don't mean she is better, but she's feeling better. She's able to go horseback riding and do some queen duties and things. So one of her queen duties was to go down towards the English-Scottish border to a place called Jedburgh or Jedburgh, just to go oversee criminal cases and like go visit with her subjects and be like, hey, remember me? You all love me. Great. So the borders this is Bothwell's home turf. Like that's where the Hepburns all live. So he went down first to get things ready for her arrival. But while he was there, he was attacked by a person whose name was Jack O' the Park.
A real cartoon character of a man.
It's giving me big Bushrangers energy.
It really is getting into like Captain Thunderbolt territory.
So yeah, so he was attacked by Jack O' the Park. And then Mary she headed down to Jedburgh. Darnley obviously not with her. He was busy like pouting or whatever, but she had Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart was with her. Scottish Machiavelli was there. Cockle Jr., like 40 other men. So en route, they got word that Bothwell had been violently ambushed by Jack O' the Park. And they thought maybe he was dead, but he was not dead. But he had been injured with sword wounds. So,
Not great.
No, exactly. Sword wounds, never a good thing. So for a week, she stayed in Jedburgh, doing all of her like queen work. And then after that, she and the 40 men she was with went to visit Bothwell. They went to check in on him. They said like, oh, he's not dying. Great. And then they left. So there is a persistent myth that when Mary heard Bothwell was ill, she went off by herself right away to go be by his side. That is not true. She heard he was maybe injured, did work for a week, and then with 40 other men went to check on him. So I just wanted to point that out because that's a misunderstanding that some people, her haters, would later claim. Because, I'll say now, her haters started spreading rumors that she and Bothwell were having an affair. And this experience is not evidence of that at all.
Like if I were having an affair, I probably would not bring 40 other men with me to watch.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be like, oh my God, my lover was almost killed. Let me just like work for a week and then go there with 40 other men. Anyway, so a few days later, she felt incredibly ill from, quote, spleen, which today we know is the name of an organ, but back then was the name of a malady, I guess. And this was really intense. So she had convulsions. She lost the power of speech. She lost the power of sight. She laid stiff as though she was dead, like her body was all clenched up. This was over the course of a week. It just got worse. Worse and worse. Her doctor, Charles Now, who is French, he saved the day by wrapping her up really tight like a mummy and then massaging her muscles so they would bend, and then forcing wine in her mouth and an enema up her bum, and then she like vomited blood and then got better. So
Huh. The human body's a mystery.
this was probably again not her chronic porphyria condition. Some people say that the symptoms sound more like a gastric ulcer that burst, maybe. And so in an era before blood transfusions, what he did helped her. And in fact, she did get better, but like she like was so close to dying. Everybody, like herself, but also the advisors were just like, oh my God, if she died, leaving a baby king, does that mean Darnley would be in charge?
Lord alive.
That was quite catastrophic for everybody to imagine. They also blamed Darnley for her medical situation because he had, I guess, visited her recently, but it's like you can't blame Darnley for like her ulcer bursting. But like you can blame
You
him.
can try though.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I would. But I think you can blame him for upsetting her. Scottish Machiavelli wrote in a letter, "It is heartbreak for her to think that he should be her husband, and how to be free of him she sees no way out." Oh, yeah. So speaking of Scottish Machiavelli, a guy who I have to emphasize people then called the Scottish Machiavelli. He's a really crafty guy. His real name is Maitland, and he was her like Secretary of State. But he's the Scottish Machiavelli to me. And so he was like, okay, Darnley sucks. So maybe the best thing for like everyone, by which I mean me, is if someone murdered Darnley.
Hypothetically speaking.
Now, I'm going to say Darnley does suck, and I would not blame anyone for murdering him. And this isn't a reason to murder him, but note that when Mary was like actively almost dying, he didn't come to visit her until at the end when she had already gotten better. So,
Although if I saw Darnley when I was sick, it would make me feel worse.
actually,
So
that's true.
maybe that was
That's
the
true.
right.
In retrospect, maybe a good call. Anyway, so then Mary got sick again. And this time it was probably the porphyria. So, like, I talked about that a bit in, like, I think one of the first episodes, but it's something like it's a chronic condition that can be triggered by various things. One of them is like when you fasting. Basically, if you don't eat enough, it can be triggered. And when she got distressed, she would lose her appetite and she would stop eating. So then this would happen. And the porphyria, like the symptoms are like severe stomach pains and things like that, but also what they call a melancholy, but just like extreme depression. Because like there's a mental I don't blame her for having extreme depression as a person in this situation at all. But like
No.
but like this would come simultaneously. Like she would get horrible stomach pains and she would express suicidal ideation. And then once she got better, she would stop. So it's like the mental illness was part of the porphyria as well. So probably having the gastric ulcer triggered the porphyria to come up again. She was heard to repeat, "I wish I could be dead," over and over. But she was also thinking, like, the whole thing about, like, if she died, like, what next? She didn't want Darnley to be in charge. So she wrote to Elizabeth asking her, like, should Mary die? Like, please step in and be the protector of baby BJ. And which was actually, like, a really good move. Like, firstly, just, like, yeah, it, like, sidelines Darnley, but also it also makes Elizabeth be like, maybe I do want to consider Mary my heir. This is a nice thing she did. And Elizabeth, at this point, like she was annoyed how Cecil and the other advisor kept telling her what to do, which is like fair enough. He did seem his advice was good. But she was like, you know what? Sure. So she proposed that they could write a new treaty that would be kind of like, okay, like Mary will be my heir, but put in lots of like codicils being like, but she can't be if Elizabeth is assassinated or whatever, just to be kind of like, Mary's heirs will be my heirs, basically.
But if Mary decides to kill me, she can't be queen, but we're not gonna do that.
Yeah. So it's just really carefully written. So they were writing letters back and forth, and things like honestly had never seemed as positive between them for a while. So there had been this old Treaty of Edinburgh that was like a thing that before Mary was even in Scotland, I think Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart and the English wrote this thing that basically said, you know, like, I don't know, it was like England can take over or whatever. Mary has no power. And so she never ratified it. So, but Elizabeth was like, you know what? That's fine. You don't have to ratify it. We're going to write this new Treaty of Perpetual Amity. Everything seemed to be like going in a good direction. This was February 8th. And the next day, Darnley was murdered and everything went to hell. So we'll rewind a little bit to explain what happened. So when
Although that's probably not a surprise to you if you did listen to the names of
the
ancestors,
fact that like two of the books are
the murder of Lord Darnley.
Yeah. So rewind. 10 minutes ago. So when Mary fell ill in Jedburgh, when she had the thing where the doctor had to wrap her up like a mummy and force wine down her throat. So the Rizzio conspirators, who are still like a group of just murderers, they blamed Darnley for upsetting her too much.
You know what else probably upset her? Your murders.
You murdering her best friend in front of her by stabbing him 56 times and then trying to take over?
Can't imagine how that might be upsetting.
Yeah, so they just got together to, and I think I might call the episode this, How Do You Solve a Problem Like Darnley? They're just like, what are we going to do? They're like, so we hate Darnley. Agreed. But like
Agreed.
his dad is Lennox, and also he's connected to the Douglas. A Douglas is! His family's powerful, so how can we get rid of him in a way that won't like, start a war with them? So what they wanted was to convince somehow Mary if she could pardon Jam Jam, if you'll remember, and the other exiled Rizzio murderers and recall them to Scotland, because then the Rizzio murderers could get together and that would maybe counterbalance the Lennox faction. So they needed to get those guys all back on the scene. And I think I mentioned before, like they were starting to get back on the scene. So that's because these guys are plotting it.
This is a real reunion tour for the Rizzio murders.
Yeah. So they're like, well, how can we get her to pardon all of them? And so Scottish Machiavelli was like, okay, plan A. Let's get Mary a divorce so that Darnley can't attempt a coup, because if they're not married, then he doesn't have any claim to anything. And in this era and time, it was like no big deal, seemingly, for women, especially Protestant women, to get a divorce. Like you remember Ruthven, who was dying of cancer, clanking around in his armor? Like his wife had divorced him like while he was dying. Like you could just casually get divorced in Scotland at this time, no big deal. But Mary, like that's not an option for her because she's the queen and her son can be illegitimate, etc.
And also she's Catholic and the Pope is famously not
Not
super on
into
board
divorcing. Yeah,
with all.
exactly. But Scottish Machiavelli was like, okay, if we can arrange for her to get a divorce, Mary will be so grateful that we helped her get a divorce that she'll agree to pardon the murderers. But Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart and Cock of the North Jr. Cock of the North Jr. and Bothwell are involved in these talks, by the way. So it's not just the Rizzio murderers, it's like everybody.
All of the people in the entire kingdom are like, okay, guys.
It's like Catholic, Protestant, doesn't matter. It's like we all hate this fucking guy.
So much.
Let's figure this out, team. Okay, so anyway, they're like, she's like what you just said, Allison. Like, Mary is never going to agree to a divorce for Catholic reasons. But Scottish Machiavelli was like, but maybe she will. So eventually, he convinced them. So because he is the Scottish Machiavelli, he's persuasive.
Good at convincing.
So eventually he got Bothwell, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, Cock of the North Jr., and Argyle, the guy who had sat outside the birth room, to work on this new plan to encourage her to divorce Darnley. So eventually Scottish Machiavelli went to her. I guess he was like, I'm the most persuasive. I'll be one who can persuade her. And he's like, what if you divorce Darnley? And she's like, no, because that puts my son's legitimacy into question, etc. In her usual way, she was like, what if everyone just acts cool and we stop having murders and civil wars?
Wouldn't that be a novel idea for 5 minutes?
Well, and this is especially because the Elizabeth thing was in the works. Like she didn't want to make any big moves. She didn't want any scandal to happen that would risk this treaty with Elizabeth not working out for her to like get what she wanted, which is to be named Elizabeth's heir. And like divorcing Darnley would probably make Elizabeth change her mind, right? So Scottish Machiavelli was like, okay, cool, forget I ever suggested anything. Doo, doo, doo. So then it's time for the baptism of baby BJ. This is 6 months after his birth because a lot had happened.
Yeah.
Mary almost died twice, etc. So she planned this extravaganza, this 3-day celebration modeled on festivities that Catherine de' Medici had recently held in France the year before. And the festivities Catherine had done were sort of like a big reconciliation celebration where she's like, hey, Catholics and Huguenots, what if not murdering each other? Let's have a party. So Mary wanted her thing to be modeled after that just because it was a great party, but also because in a similar reconciliation thing, like, hey, Catholics and Protestants, let's all be cool.
Can I say, if I was a French Catholic or a French Protestant and Catherine de' Medici threw another party and said, do you want to come to this party? I swear I won't murder anybody anymore. I feel like I might not believe that.
Yeah. I mean, and that would be fair. So she had this big party and she invited all the monarchs of the other countries. The monarchs couldn't come because they're busy, but they each sent representatives. And even though it was her big reconciliation party event, it was a Catholic baptism. So the Protestant lords boycotted. Her allies at this point, who were Protestant, attended, but they just stood outside of the actual chapel for the actual baptism part. That's Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, Bothwell, and Cochran North Jr. As the godparents for baby BJ, godfather, she chose the Duke of Savoy, who was Rizzio's boss. So I think that's her way of just a nod towards how much she loved Davy Rizzio. Because she couldn't choose his 19-year-old brother Joseph Rizzio as godfather. He's just some guy, but she had to choose someone royal, so she chose the Duke of Savoy. So I like that as a Rizzio connection.
Mm-hmm.
As godmother, she chose Elizabeth for political reasons, but also Elizabeth.
Very smart move.
Oh, definitely, and it's because Elizabeth is the protector and stuff. So Elizabeth couldn't come, of course, she's busy, but she sent along as a baptism present this font, so a fountain made of solid gold, this gigantic jewel-encrusted, humongous thing. And she, as a gift, so I don't know if giving gifts is also her love language, but I guess she told people, she's play it down, tell Mary, it's oh, I don't know if it's big enough to baptize the baby in. And then when it arrives, it's you could baptize 12 babies in this. It's this ridiculously ostentatious thing.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, and I think she was this is for you to baptize your baby in and all your future babies you're going to have. It's a nice gesture. Darnley did not attend because he was busy making schemes or visiting the brothels or whatever he did. Trying to hire a boat to sail him to Netherlands or whatever he was doing. And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a co-founder of the Go Kid Go network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. During her journey, Isla meets new friends, including King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and learns valuable life lessons with every quest, sword fight, and dragon ride. Positive and uplifting stories remind us all about the importance of kindness, friendship, honesty, and positivity. Join me and an all-star cast of actors including Liam Neeson, Emily Blunt, Kristen Bell, Chris Hemsworth, among many others, in welcoming the Search for the Silver Lining podcast to the Go Kid Go network by listening today. Look for the Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who's ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
We're the Ghost Story Guys.
And every 2 weeks, we explore first-person stories of encounters with the paranormal from all around the world.
Then we have some fun reacting to those stories. We like to say our goal is to scare the hell out of you, then make you laugh.
Belief in the paranormal is not required. All you need is a love of great storytelling and curiosity about the world around you.
Come find the Ghost Story Guys on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else fine podcasts live, or at ghoststoryguys.com.
And we're back.
I have the vaguest memory that he was having like a syphilis flare up again, and so that's why he didn't go, but I'm not sure if that's true.
That is entirely could be true because he's going to have a really bad syphilis flare up very soon. So with him absent, and honestly, nobody missed him. I like this. Even the people, even the haters weren't like, where is Darnley? Does that mean the baby is illegitimate? Everyone's like, thank God he's not here. Like, he's not here. Great. So she just got her other guys, her like trusted advisors, to step up to like be the man to greet the ambassadors and whatever. So like Bothwell took that role. Hollywood Icon Jimmy Stewart is there. Cockermouth Jr. Like they were all. She gave them each outfits. I forget who got what color, but it's like she gave one a blue outfit and one a green outfit and one a red outfit. And they were just like,
I love it. She's got so much style.
she does like fashion. She really makes a statement. The ambassador, because Elizabeth couldn't be there, so her representative was a guy named Bedford, who William Cecil had chosen. And his job was to sweet-talk Mary into pardoning the David Rizzio co-conspirators. That was because, Cecil wanted them back in Scotland just kind of to cause chaos, to destabilize her reign, because that was what he wanted, long-term plan. Like, Cecil wasn't like, let's assassinate Mary. He wasn't like, he was just like, let's like just put a whole bunch of assholes there, wait for chaos to happen, and then inevitably that will destabilize her reign. And that's why he's so good at scheming, because he's always thinking ahead.
Yeah, because you can get caught in an assassination. It's hard to get caught in subtly destabilizing a reign enough so that she doesn't have the power to usurp anybody. Like that, you're home free that way.
This is where I would call Cecil the English Machiavelli, but I've never seen people call him that. So he wanted Bedford to do this. But meanwhile, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart and Bothwell also wanted those guys back because they wanted them back. They wanted the Douglases back. Like they wanted the Rizzio murderers back so that they could help get rid of Darnley. So this guy Bedford is like, maybe you should forgive these guys. And then her like trusted guys, Bothwell and Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, were like, that's a great idea. Maybe you should pardon those guys. And she's like, maybe I should. So on Christmas Eve, she pardoned Jam Jam and over 70 other of the murderers, including even the guy who had held the pistol to her belly.
That's a bold move.
Which is a guy I personally would not have. But anyway, it's just like her whole thing. She's like, this will make things be cool. Like, let's be chill. Like, let's just not have civil war. Which again is very much the point of view of Mary in the TV show Reign. In the France parts, they show her and Francis really tried to make everything be cool in France between the Catholics and Protestants. It didn't work, but that's what they wanted. And it's just interesting that in history, this actually is her point of view. She just wanted people to be cool, but she was like, I don't know, 300 years too early to try and have people like have peaceful coexistence. Anyway. And so she agreed to pardon them. And I just put in a note here that she was still very ill, by the way. Like she had gotten over that whole like almost dying thing. And then the porphyria attack. Like she's still like postpartum things are happening. She was seen weeping and complaining of a grievous pain in her side. So she might have just been like, you know what? I trust these guys. Like if this is what they say, like, let's just do it. Like I don't have the, what is it? I don't have the spoons to like,
yeah,
think about this. And this is where people are like, oh, Mary, she was a bad queen. She like made this bad decision. It's like, what would you have her do?
I don't think it's that bad of a decision, selfishly.
No, I think it's fine. I'm just saying, for instance, people are like, well, why did she let those guys back in town? It's like, well, what choice did she have? Truly, like she didn't have her own, even the people who were on her side were telling her to do this. So it's like, if she said no, then she would alienate them. Like she needed someone on her side. So anyway, Jam Jam is back in town. What is his name? Like Jam from Parks and Recreation. So he is the leader, as you might recall, of the Douglases. A Douglas! And he hated Darnley more than anything for betraying them. Because if you recall, the David Rizzio murder, like the Douglases, like there's like 400 people there, like 350 of them were Douglases. And he's the head of the Douglases. And Darnley, like, truly betrayed them when he escaped with Mary and made them all lose their lands and titles, right? So JJ, or Jam Jam, is back on the scene. And he meets up immediately with Scottish Machiavelli and Bothwell. He's like, what's the scheme? What are we scheming? And they're like, okay, the plan is to like try and get married to divorce Darnley, but maybe also murder Darnley. We're batting those ideas around. And Jam Jam is like, I'm in, whatever the plan is, like, fuck Darnley, let's do it. Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart knew about this plan, by the way, but in his usual way, he kind of like kept his hands clean because he knew that it would be to his benefit if Darnley was murdered, but he didn't want, in case it went badly, he didn't want his name to be connected to it. So he's just like a slippery guy. Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart. Like, he wanted this to happen, but he didn't, and he was involved, but he didn't want anyone. So if there was paperwork, I don't think he signed the paperwork, sort of thing. He also notably didn't warn Mary that this was going to happen. So, okay. We're catching up to like the actual murder. Again, this is the second true crime podcast in a row. And again, I'm going to tell this in order instead of like, yeah, just so you know who's doing what when. Like, you know who killed Darnley, right? It's like all these guys. All these guys I just said.
There's no mystery
No.
here. It's all the guys who said, let's get together and kill Darnley. Those are the ones who did it.
Exactly. So at this point in time, Darnley he had fallen ill with what some people said was smallpox, but which was more than likely untreated with secondary syphilis. Now, he had sores all over his body with like erupting pustules. And here's what I want to say. Syphilis is like not an old-timey disease only. People get it today, but there is now antibiotics. So this is why you want to treat your syphilis so it doesn't turn into pustules all over your body.
Right. And if it's left untreated for long enough, it starts to like eat away at parts of your brain and like affect your personality and cognition. So old-timey syphilis, real horrible, awful, terrible disease. Today, much more treatable.
Much more treatable. But also, I don't know if the syphilis, like Darnley is a piece of shit, horrible person. And
I'm not blaming the syphilis for his personality.
No, but I'm saying like maybe some of his like wackier plans to like invade England might be syphilis getting in the brain.
Maybe. It could just be him being a dumbass. Who's to say?
It's true. It's true. So anyway, so he had sores all over his body. And so at this time, what the treatment was 6 weeks of mercury baths.
God, the Renaissance was awful.
He was staying in Glasgow at the moment. And the reason he was there is because that's where his kinsmen were, like the Lennoxes. So he felt safer there. To be fair, everyone wanted to kill him. So he was right.
Yeah.
So he was in Glasgow, and where he was like planning a coup against Mary, by the way, because he did want to kidnap the baby and take over. Mary heard about this because Darnley is terrible at keeping secrets. So she went to Glasgow, and he was like, no, don't look at me.
My syphilis.
My handsome face.
The only thing I had that wasn't annoying.
It's like in Little Women, like, Joe, you're one beauty. Like, the only good thing about Darnley was his handsome face. And now it's
your one redeeming quality.
Yeah. So, and honestly, like she went to Glasgow and he was like, okay, don't see me until after my pustules have cleared up. But then one day later, he was like, okay, you can see me, but I'll wear a taffeta mask across my face, which he did. So anyway, she was just going there to be like, hi, can you just like, please come back to Edinburgh, basically, so we can keep an eye on you. Like, just, I want you to not be planning a coup against me. So can you just not be here? Like, can you just be closer to me? So she wanted to bring him back there for that reason, but her advisors, Bothwell and Cocko the North Jr., wanted him back in Edinburgh because they couldn't assassinate him if he was in Glasgow because his family were around to defend him, right? Like they wanted him in Edinburgh for murder reasons. She wanted him in Edinburgh for just like keep an eye on him reasons. So she went and she told him like, I know you're planning to kidnap our son and imprison me to take over. And he's like, actually, I'm the victim.
He sucks so bad, Anne. He's the worst.
Everything. Just like at every turn, he does the worst thing. Anyway, but he was also like, I'm not going to go back to Edinburgh. Like, I know everyone there wants to kill me. So I need to stay in Glasgow where they probably also hate me, but they're my family, so they probably won't kill me. But she wanted him there because like she was in this really delicate negotiation with Elizabeth. Like she wanted to make sure like she had to keep Darnley under house arrest so he didn't do anything stupid until she like got these papers signed with Elizabeth.
She's babysitting this man. Just like, come sit in your room and don't touch anything while I try and finish this contract. And then you can go do whatever you want.
And then also she was sort of play acting that they were reconciling as husband and wife because that made her look like a good, stable person that Elizabeth would want as her heir. To be like, look, like my marriage is stable. I will therefore be a stable monarch also. Like, so she was sort of play acting, reconciling with him. And then he was still like, I don't want to go. So finally she was like, if you come back to Edinburgh, I will let you fuck me. This is true.
And he's like, my one desire.
Yeah. And he's like, okay. And she's like, but only after your pustules are healed over. And and he's like, deal. I'll just go hop in my mercury bath. And
on wheels, and we'll push it to Edinburgh.
yeah. So anyway, so he's like, okay, I will come with you back to Edinburgh. And so she's going to go back to her usual. She was actually staying in Holyrood, a place that I would have thought had too much trauma for her to stay in, but whatever. You know what? She's tough. It also had nice memories of her time with Davy Rizzio, not just his murder.
And the sex stairs. So if they were going there to have sex, the stairs are ready.
Oh, that's true, the sex stairs. So she's going to go to Holyrood, but he was like, I can't go there. No one can see me like this. No one can see me with pustules. So they were planning that he was going to stay at a different castle, also in Edinburgh or near Edinburgh, called Craigmillar Castle. But at the last minute, he was like, I feel like I will be murdered if I go there. So at the last minute, he was like, I'm going to go somewhere else. And the house that he chose to go to was whimsically called Kirk O'Field.
Kirk O'Field really sounds like a Scottish lacrosse player to me.
Yeah.
It's just quite a name.
It's a cute name. Like Jack O' the Park was the guy who attacked Bothwell, and then Kirk O'Field is the house. So this is also, I just want to clear this up for people who don't know the story, or like, why are you like hammering this home? But like people who do know the story, I'm just like debunking here. People wanted to murder Darnley, and the people who wanted to murder Darnley thought he was going to be at Craigmillar Castle, and that's what they were planning. And that's honestly so good for him for switching. So he switched at the last minute to Kirk O'Field, and this was his decision. Some people later said Mary chose that house, but it's like, no, he was like, no, I want to go to somewhere else. But he didn't want to go to Holyrood because people would see his pustules. So Kirk O'Field was like near Edinburgh, but like a bit further away. But the thing is like, okay, so Kirk O'Field was a place that had 2 lodgings in it. There was a mansion, which was owned by Auden Sr., who was in episodes like 2 and 3 quite a lot, but he hasn't been seen since, I think, the chase about raids. He just went off to France, and that's where he's been. And then the other lodging was the old provost's lodging. And so he wanted to stay in the mansion, but they were like, how about the old provost's lodging? So, and it like didn't have any furniture in it. Like they had to like really quickly furnish it. And like, he was like, but I need also tapestries and my Turkish rugs. And this fucking guy.
He needed a tapestry to hide his pustules behind.
So he could whip it out and be like, it's me.
Yep. Darnley. So
the old provost lodging wasn't owned by Auden Sr. It had recently come into the hands of a guy named Sir James Balfour, and who was Darnley's friend. Darnley thought was his friend. So he's like, I feel good staying there because Balfour owns it. Like, I trust Balfour. But he didn't know that Balfour was now also on the side of everybody else who wanted to murder him. But
the entire country of Scotland.
Anyway, so it was a last-minute plan because the place was sparsely furnished. So all in a rush, he had all his stuff moved in. In fact, the 6 tapestries that were hung up in his bedchamber were ones that had been confiscated from the house of Cocko the North back in the day.
Right before his posthumous trial.
Darnley's room, okay. So Darnley's room is set up on the first floor, by which I mean there's like the ground floor, then the first floor. So it's like, one might call it the second floor. The books I read call it the first floor, which confused me because they're like, well, because they're like, Mary's room was 1 floor below. And I'm like, Mary was in the basement? No. Okay, so Darnley is on, quote unquote, the first floor. And he had a bathtub set up right next to his bed so he could have his mercury bath all the time. And there was a room directly below his that was set up for Mary because she would come by and spend the night sometimes. No secret sex stairs, but anyway. And then there was a kitchen in the cellar. So he had a small group of servants with him, various people, I don't know, like 5 or 6 men. One of them is called William Taylor, and that's a name I will bring up later. And they all spent the night. Like they all, I don't know, I guess they had to move beds in, right?
Or did they? They just sleep on some chests.
R.I.P. Rizzio, sleeping on chests. Yeah, like the bed shortage was such that the bed that was, actually they brought a bed for Darnley and he was like, this bed isn't good enough, which is just like Princess and the Pea vibes, really. So then they brought in a different bed that actually had been Mary's mother's old bed, Marie de Guise's bed. Anyway, so all the servants stayed in the house in either beds or toppled over bookshelves. Except for there was a cook whose name is Bonkil, Bonkil, Bonkil.
All right.
Who went home after his duties were done. Like, good for you, Bonkil. And there was apparently no guards, which was either an oversight or just intentional because
I was gonna say, if you're so worried that you're gonna get murdered, I feel like that would be the first thing you would check.
no, all he had was like a cook, some footmen, like that was all he had. Anyway, so he stayed there. So he went to Kirk O'Field. Mary went to visit him every day. Twice she spent the night in her separate room, and they seemed to be in okay terms. Because remember, she's like play acting, like, we're reconciled. I'm a stable person to be the heir to the throne of England. So they were like playing cards, listening to music, like other nobles came by to visit. At some point, Mary tried to make peace between Darnley and everyone, but everyone
Good luck.
refused because they hated him and were actively planning his murder. But anyway, so while Mary was just being like, we're a happy, stable married couple, she also had her spies were investigating like what he was up to, which was, some sort of crazy treason plan. By that Friday night, February 7th, rumors were spreading that there was some sort of conspiracy against Darnley in the works, and people already started to suspect Bothwell was behind whatever it was. So, Sunday, February 9th. It's the last Sunday in Lent, and therefore a day of carnival and feasting. And Mary loves a feast. She loves dancing. And so, what a coincidence, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart came to see Mary to be like, ooh, I have to be out of town today because my wife is very ill after a miscarriage. So, bye.
Another convenient, maybe miscarriage in this story.
Yeah, no, and like his wife was 100, like if he was like, oh no, my wife had a miscarriage, I have to go be with her, like he didn't go be with her. So whether she was or not, he just was like, I just need to be like pointedly not here tonight. No reason. Which is how he just like slips and slides out of blame for everything. So anyway, that Sunday morning, Mary attended the marriage of two of her favorite servants. Remember, she loves marriages. She always buys the bride's dress and she pays for the banquet. And so the two servants were Bastian Pages, who was one of her...
Incredible.
Oh, it's great. Sometimes it's spelled with a Z, Pages. And his wife was Christely Hogg.
This is not a James to be seen. Very happy about that.
The marriage of Bastian and Christely. Bastian Pages was also, in the absence of Davy Rizzio, he had taken over doing some of the party planning. So he was responsible for the big 3-day baptism extravaganza. He helped write the masks and stuff. So she attended the wedding at Holyrood in the chapel, and then she had other things to do. But she's like, but I'll be back tonight for the dancing, which was going to be a masked dance. And she loves a disguise. So next she went to a house where there was a farewell party was happening for the Duke of Savoy, remember, who had been in town to be the godfather. So she went to that party and she was accompanied by Bothwell, Argyle, Cocker the North Jr. were all there. And they were pre-wearing their masks for the mask party later, which I think is funny that they just wore mask, like fancy dress, to a non-fancy dress party because they're like, well, we're just going to fancy dress party after this. So Bothwell's mask was, or I don't know if it's his mask or his outfit was black satin fringed with silver. So, and remember, Mary had all those colored feathers and things. So I'm sure they had amazing outfits. So then she left that banquet still in their costumes to go hang out with Darnley at Kirk O'Field. He was having a yay, my pustules are gone party. So he had finished his final mercury bath and he was planning to head over to Holyrood the next day. Also present at this party was Scottish Machiavelli. And so they were just hanging out, playing cards and music, dice games. And Mary was like, okay, I have to go back to the Bastian and Christely. I've been wearing this mask all day. I have to go for the actual mask dance party. And Darnley was like, but then you'll come back and spend the night with me. And Bothwell was like, nope, she can't. No reason. Nope. Don't support that. Can't say why. She's an early start tomorrow. Anyway, so she was like, yeah, no, I'll go to Holyrood. I'm going to this mask party. It's at Holyrood where I live. So I'll sleep there. Whatever. And then she's like, but don't worry. Tomorrow when you come to Holyrood, we can go up the secret sex stairs. And then as a token of this pledge to have sex tomorrow, she gave him a ring. Anyway, on her way out, she noticed a servant known as French Paris.
Okay.
Was he from France? I have to say, I doubt it, but I love the commitment. It's like, oh, I'm French. Really? What's your name? French. Paris. French Paris. So on her way out, she saw French Paris, who was, I think, a servant of Bothwell. And he was he looked dirty. She was just like, Paris, how begrimed you are.
The better to eat you with, my dear.
And he said nothing but turned very red. And in retrospect, he was, in fact, covered in gunpowder that he had been putting all over the house.
Because nobody involved in this part of the story can keep a secret for a single second.
It's the same as with the Rizzio murder. They're all so bad at this.
This is horrendous scheme.
No, exactly. So it was very cold that night, like February in Edinburgh. So there's a light frosting of snow. It was very dark. The new moon would not appear until 6 a.m. At Kirk O'Field, Darnley went to bed at around midnight, and he ordered his horses to be outside by 5 a.m. so he could go to Holyrood. He was just like, I'm getting fucked tomorrow at 5 a.m. Okay, and then this is like, I have to say, like, asterisk. His father wrote that this is what happened. This is what his father imagined happened that night. So he said, let us go merrily to bed in singing a song before. But he declined to accompany his men on the lute, saying, my hand is not inclined to the lute this night. And then together...
Why is Lennox making out these... What are these details adding to the storyline?
No, but then he said, his father said that then Darnley and the Pages, they all like sang together some like Bible song.
Oh, I'm sure it was a real sing-along.
A real psalm
sing-along,
yeah. So, okay, so then he went to bed. That's midnight. Shortly before 2 a.m., a woman named Mrs. Barbara Merton, who lived nearby. I'm going to refer later to a drawing, but her house is on the drawing. Barbara Merton lived nearby. She was awakened by running footsteps. She looked out and counted 13 armed men rushing past. Around the same time, some women lodging in another area nearby heard a man's voice crying desperately, pity me, kinsman, for the love of him who had pity on all the world. Then silence. Then a bright flash lit the sky, followed by a huge explosion. The noise was like nothing anyone had ever heard. This is like, I hadn't thought about this way, but one of the books I read was saying that no one had ever used explosives in a non-war situation ever before. Like, to blow up a house was like, what? Like, what? No one knew what was happening. So they're just like, was it a crack of thunder? There's like, it sounded like 30 cannons simultaneously firing. Like, no one knew what this was. It was just a weird thing. Everything within a radius of 100 yards or more of Kirk O'Field was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the house itself was just reduced to a pile of rubble. People who slept in the furthermost parts of the town were awakened. Like, everyone heard this everywhere. Like, it was just a weird thing, and no one knew what it was. So, just after the explosion, Mrs. Barbara Merton and her neighbor, Mrs. Mary Sterling, saw 11 men emerge and run up the street, 2 of them in light-colored clothing. As they passed, Barbara, to her credit, called after them, traitors, you have been at some evil turn. And then she grabbed...
You tell him, Barbara.
Exactly. She grabbed one of them by his silk cloak and asked him where did that explosion just happen? But he didn't answer. And then the men broke up into 2 groups and ran away. Members of the Night Watch, remember the Night Watch from when they came with their torches to see if Mary was okay? The Night Watch shows up. And the first man they saw...
Grab your torches.
Time to... I don't know. The Night Watch just feels really wholesome to me in this story. They're just
always looking out. Yeah.
Neighborhood watch. Anyway, so the Night Watch showed up, and the first man they saw there was Captain William Blackadder, played by Rowan Atkinson in the long-standing
100%.
British TV show, who was one of Bothwell's men, actually. And the Night Watch were just like, okay, something weird happened. This guy is here. And they're like, that's suspicious. Although he was like, no, I was just like drinking at my friend's house and I came out to see what caused the explosion, like all the looky-loos. But they're like, okay, Blackadder.
Your name sounds suspicious and you look like Rowan Atkinson. This can't be normal.
Yeah, look at those eyebrows. So just everybody started converging on the side of the explosion. Like, what the fuck just happened? Like, what is happening? Like, what was that noise? What was that sound? Like, why is the house rubble now? Like, no one had ever experienced outside of war. And even in war, I don't think you exploded things like this. So anyway, they rescued one of Darnley's men who had survived. And they're like, oh my God, people are in this house. And then they start digging in the smoking rubble with their bare hands to see if there's anyone else. Because they knew the king was there. And they're like, oh my God, where's Darnley? So the explosion woke up Mary at Holyrood. Bothwell was also there, maybe. There's contesting things. Was Bothwell there when the explosion happened, or was he back? It was close. So he could have been at one and then went back to the other thing. Anyway, but conveniently, Bothwell, one of his titles was Sheriff of Edinburgh. And it was his responsibility to investigate any crime committed in the city.
Convenient.
Yeah, since he had organized the whole thing. No conflict of interest. Don't worry about it. So allegedly, he was found in his bed where he was with his wife, Jean Gordon. And they were like, oh my God, the house of Darnley just blew up. And he said, fie, treason. and then sent his
No, not the House of Darnley, he said, startled.
So he sent his investigators to see what was going on, and then he like went back to bed. So like,
I love that he couldn't even muster the fucks to pretend for a full hour. He's just like, no, I'm done.
yeah, he's like, oh, someone else will look into that. I'm tired now. So meanwhile, 2 more dead bodies were unearthed at Kirk O'Field, 2 of the other servants. So it wasn't until 5 a.m., 3 hours after the explosion, that Darnley's body was discovered in a garden like 40 feet or like away from the house. So he was laying dead along with his valet, Taylor. Now, both were nearly naked, wearing just nightshirts and no pants. Darnley was stretched out on his back under a pear tree with one hand delicately covering his genitals, while Taylor lay a yard or 2 away, curled up, wearing a night bonnet and 1 slipper. There were no burns, no marks of strangulation or violence, no fracture wound or bruise on either of them. Next to the bodies lay a chair, a length of rope, a dagger, and Darnley's furry cloak. There's also 1 backless velvet slipper. So the bodies and the items did not look like they'd been thrown there by the blast, but clearly somebody had laid them out there like that. And this just sounds like the opening scene of Encyclopedia Brown or some sort of brain teaser or like Miss Marple. Like,
it feels like the answer to a game of Clue, or it was Darnley under the pear tree with a length of rope and a single slipper.
Just like it was really weird. So, okay, so this is what happened, but here's what probably happened. I pieced together through reading several books that were all guessing what happened. So the thing is, the conspirators, one of them was like a gunpowder expert, and I was like an explosives expert, and I was like, who's an explosives expert in like 1560 whatever? But it's like, oh, this like army guy, this like mercenary. So the conspirators had put gunpowder. Well, first of all, the conspirators had like rolled barrels of gunpowder up the street to Kirk O'Field, and those were Bothwell's servants, and people saw them doing it.
Probably where they got covered in gunpowder ahead of time.
Yeah.
Just like, bro.
Paris, you are besmirched. So the conspirators had put gunpowder all through the downstairs of the house, like packing it into the foundation of the house and things like that, because they were planning to blow up the house with Darnley in it. John Hepburn, who is one of Bothwell's kinsmen, watched the house after Mary left, because remember, they didn't want to kill her. They just want to kill Darnley. So they waited for her to leave and then waited until the candles were snuffed out, and then he lit the slow fuse. So there were people outside as well, lurking around in case Darnley escaped, to make sure that he would die in some other way if necessary. But Darnley was awakened, or he had been awakened, when he heard armed men around the house, the backup guys. And so also, I don't know if it was John Hepburn or somebody else, like went through and like locked all the doors so Darnley couldn't escape through any of the doors. So guessing they were there to kill him correctly, he used his chair and the rope to sneak out a window, first putting on his cloak and grabbing his dagger. This is where I feel like I'm solving the brain teaser.
Right. Not grabbing his pants, apparently. That was not.
Nope. You know what? Darnley's not a pants-on type person. So once outside, a guy named Kerr of Hoddenside, who was the man recently pardoned who had held the pistol to Mary's belly during the Rizzio murder, was waiting with a gang of others loyal to Bothwell. They were waiting in what's called Thieves' Alley, which is like, of course, that's also in the drawing. We're going to talk about the drawing in a minute. So Darnley tried to reason with them. Father would later claim Darnley recited a whole paragraph of Bible verses.
Okay, sure.
Did Darnley know?
I bet what he actually recited was, "Oh fuck, please don't kill me." That's probably the extent of it.
I'm really the victim. I knew it. Anyway, so then they probably strangled him with his own nightshirt and then put it back on him. I'm not sure. Or with the rope. I don't know. Anyway. And then, so this is like the house had not yet blown up yet, right? So they dragged him over to the nearest garden, but they couldn't bring him any closer to the house because they knew the house was about to explode and they had to get out of the way. So that's why he was in this garden kind of nearby. So the whole thing where the women had heard somebody say, "Oh, my kinsmen have mercy on me," indicates that it was a Douglas. To their credit, I don't think they yelled that while they were killing him.
They might have. I
would not be surprised if they had. Anyway, the women who saw all this stuff were later brought in for questioning, but then their testimony was suppressed because guess what? The people investigating this were also the murderers, and they didn't want evidence.
Right. The sheriff, Bothwell, was like, maybe don't want you guys to testify.
But you know what? I appreciate these women stepping forward and saying this evidence because I'm sure there was a lot of intimidation of people to not step forward. Anyway, so Mary was informed that he was dead. In grief, she remained in her chamber all day. And remember, she's still dealing with like various health issues, including mental health issues.
Sure. I do feel like in grief might be a little bit of an overstatement for why she was staying in her room.
Yeah, yeah.
Given the circumstances.
Well, in grief for the fact that she knew that this fucked up her deal with Elizabeth.
Yeah, that's true.
So Bothwell was also informed Darnley's dead, and he later wrote, "I was very distressed at the news, as were many others."
It's like hardly even trying to lie.
He's not.
Yes, I was upset and surprised.
No, as anyone would be. So anyway, some people went to comfort Mary. Those people were Bothwell, Cocker the North Jr., Scottish Machiavelli. I feel like the least comforting people in the world. But Mary's half-sister Jean, the one who saved the candle that other time, they went to comfort her. Mary apparently called herself one of the most unfortunate queens in the world. And I would say, yes, true. But yeah, so she was emotionally shattered. And she was also pretty sure because remember, she had been there last night. So she's like, oh my God, like if I hadn't come back here to go to that mask party, I would have been killed. She's like, they were clearly trying to kill me. Also, a reasonable assumption.
A reasonable assumption. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she's like, the whole thing about like monarchy is like, God chose us or whatever. And she's just like, you know what? I could have stayed there, but I decided to go to the party. That was God. That was God saving me. But she's upset because this is an upsetting situation. Like, Darnley was a piece of shit, but this is still distressing. And she thought that she had narrowly escaped being assassinated.
Which would upset anybody.
Exactly. So Mary commanded, she's like, we need to get to the bottom of this. So Bothwell got a company of soldiers to search the area for those responsible. I'm putting finger quotes up. Let's investigate this, said Bothwell.
Is the murderer in the room with us right now?
There's an episode of Columbo that's just like this, where this guy kills somebody and he's a private detective. And then, like, he kills this guy's wife and he's a private detective. And then the guy whose wife was killed hires a private detective to solve the murder and he's working with Columbo. It's just like that. Anyway, so William Cecil, on top of everything, he already had agents on the scene. And one of his agents is who, in fact, drew a picture that I would like for you to describe, Allison.
It is a delightful, hand-drawn map of Kirkfield, allegedly showing exactly what happened during and after the murder of Darnley, and it is truly a thing to behold. I have to assume Anne will be sharing this on the Vogue.
I'll put this on Instagram for sure, but also there's so much happening in this picture. It's a bit of a Where's Waldo like picture, but the fact that it's showing kind of like a movie what happened before, during, and after. So you've got a picture of like Darnley's body laid out dead in his nightshirt.
The size of a tree. He is enormous. There's a little tasteful smudge of ink where his privates should be, which is really very, very thoughtful.
But then there's also in another part of the picture, there's some men carrying what is the dead body of Darnley. So it's like the picture shows this is not a snapshot in time of everything happening at once. It's a bit of a comic strip of like, here's what happened.
In the top left, I think, is Darnley sitting in bed yelling something.
No.
God revenge me.
No. In the top left, what is baby BJ?
That really
is pictured in bed praying, and his mouth is saying, "Judge and avenge my cause, O Lord."
Baby BJ at this point was what, like 7 months old?
He's like not a year old.
Yeah. Okay.
But much like his father, he likes just quoting long Bible verses. Yeah, there's also numerous trees. You can also see in the picture there's the men lurking in what is Thieves' Alley. So that kind of gives you an idea of where those guys were standing. So like this guy, William Cecil's guy, instead of writing out what happened, he drew it. And
you imagine him sitting at the scene here, like taking testimony from witnesses. And he's like, okay, so there's a guy in the alley, and then you found the body under the tree. And he's like, okay, I could write that down in words, but somebody get me my colored pencils. I have to create a montage. I wish all evidence was taken.
It's a montage in a single image.
It's amazing.
Like at first I had assumed that it was a picture of a snapshot in time, but it's much more interesting than that. Anyway, it's a wild image. Yeah, and I will for sure put that on Instagram. Anyway, that was sent to Cecil and he filed that away. He's like, well, put this in my drawer of like, this guy's weird testimony.
Let me not ask this guy to take the reports anymore.
So Mary ordered a period of mourning. Remember when her first husband died? It's like 40 days. Like we need to like cover the windows. Everything needs to be black on black on black. She ordered more black fabric for a new, like for dressings for the chapel and for herself and to cover the windows. So it was the whole thing about like when Frances had died in France, when she was a teen, her first husband. Anyway, when she's a teen widow the first time, she went and then stayed in a, like not 24 hours a day, but like the room, the windows were covered in black drapery, and she just stayed in seclusion. So Bothwell was like, here's what I've figured out from my investigation. I think there's some sort of weird thunder and lightning storm, and the house burned down from that, and Darnley was thrown from the house by the thunder, is my conclusion as your sheriff.
I do love, I mean, that's quite a story that he probably thought about for 30 seconds.
Well, and here's the thing. It's like, you planned this murder. What were you going to say happened? Why didn't you think of that before?
He stopped thinking after the gunpowder and everything else was just gonna.
It's just, anyway. So there was a post-mortem examination done. So they found Darnley had a broken rib, probably sustained when he like jumped out of the window or climbed over the wall to get into the garden. He had some internal injuries, but allegedly no evidence of asphyxia or strangulation. But like most people seem to agree he was strangled. So anyway, just not bruises. I don't know. His body was briefly put on public display and a queue formed to view it, different from the queue that formed to view the body of Elizabeth II. Because this was, did they put pants on him? I don't know. He had just had an autopsy done on him, a like Renaissance autopsy. Like what were they seeing? I don't know. I feel like that cue might also be in the drawing, but I'm not sure. So then, okay. So remember, the conspirators were everybody, including the entire Privy Council. So they had a meeting like, okay, how can we make ourselves, the murderers, look innocent? Like, again, my guys, think of that before. Like
the worst conspirators. They're so bad at
like
it.
Even Scottish Machiavelli, like not worthy of the name Scottish Machiavelli. Like no one thought before. Anyway, so they wrote a letter, which is the first description of the crime, and to send to Catherine de Medici. I don't know, people keep sending her letters. In this case, it's because her envoy happened to be in town. So they're like, okay, well, we'll send that letter to her because I guess he's here. So 2 days after the murder, Mary emerged from her morning room to one of her other favored servants was getting married in the Chapel Royal at Holyrood. She'd already paid for the bride. Okay, so brides didn't used to always wear white is a pet peeve of mine in general. Because in movies, they always, like we have an expectation now the brides wear white. So no matter what time period it is, like often movies will put brides wearing white. The exception I have for that is Mary, Queen of Scots, did in fact wear white to her wedding, which was weird because white was the color of mourning, but she was like, it looks good against my skin, so I'm going to wear white. And that was weird. So she bought the fabric for the wedding dress for this bride, which was black satin and velvet.
Ooh, drama.
Goth bride, yeah. Anyway, so she went to attend this wedding, and some people, she'd also paid for the banquet. And some people, like John Knox, were scandalized that she left her mourning to attend this wedding. I would say the wedding was happening in the same castle she lived in. So
she didn't really go anywhere.
She just kind of went down the stairs, and she didn't go to the banquet afterwards. Anyway, but some people were like, this shows that she wasn't mourning, really. So if any...
I mean, I wouldn't have mourned if it was me, so...
I don't know. But the thing of how people wanted to think the worst of her all the time, but also like people mourn in different ways. But they were like, oh, you know how people say like, oh, she doesn't seem upset by this. That must mean she's not upset. Where it's like, no, some people just hide their emotions. She's also just like walking in a fugue state. She's like, I guess I'll go to this wedding now. Like, what do I do? Like, anyway, this was later used as evidence to be like, she must have been behind Darnley's murder, even though it ruined her deal with Elizabeth and everything. Anyway, later that day, she took baby BJ over to Edinburgh Castle because there's better security there. And then she returned to her secluded room. And in her absence, like she's just checked out is the sense I have of things. Like, and yeah, this is 2 days after this weird thing happened.
Yeah, you're in shock. What are you gonna do?
Exactly. So she's just like not fit to do anything, frankly. So in her absence, Bothwell kind of took control of the government and acted sort of in charge because somebody had to. And she trusted him. She didn't know he was the murderer. So this is where the investigators / cover-up team brought in witnesses. This is where the women were brought in, and they were like, "Oh, these silly women didn't see anything. None of us. They didn't see us going there, or our servants, or grab any of us by our cloaks. Nothing like that." But Mary, even at this point, she's just like, "Why are the investigators not finding who the murderers is? Like, why is this so complicated?" It's like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Well, it's complicated, derp, derp, derp," you know. So she offered a reward and a free pardon to anyone who could identify the murderers. This is all happening day by day. So the murder was like overnight on the 9th. By the 15th, Darnley was buried in the royal vault of James V in the Chapel Royal of Holyrood next to her father, sorry, the previous King of Scots. And then because clothes were expensive in this time and Darnley had nice clothes, like his clothes are left behind. It's like, well, who are you going to give them to? Like, they're not going to have like Darnley Memorial Closet Museum. And so Mary decided to give the clothes to Bothwell because she trusted him, and a tailor recut them to fit him because Bothwell, not a long lad. So anyway, so note, it was an extraordinary shock to everybody, like notably the crown, to all the other kings and queens in all of Europe to learn about this thing. Like not just like a king, because Darnley was the king of Scotland, not just a king had been killed, but he'd been killed in this new technologically advanced way. Like no one had ever heard of gunpowder being used like this before. This was weird and unusual.
One more thing for every monarch in Europe to be afraid of is now somebody might blow up my house.
No, exactly. So Mary, not doing well. We know that her health is already not great, and this is obviously very startling to her. So her health already not great. She's still like just fairly recently postpartum. She almost recently died from the gastric ulcer. And her doctors were like, maybe being shut up all day in a dark room is not, like in the castle where her best friend was murdered in front of her, is not great for her. So like, let's move her elsewhere. So she went to a place called Seaton, like a mansion or something there. She brought along with her some of her advisors. Scottish Machiavelli was one of them. She left BJ in the care of Bothwell and Cock of the North Jr., and she just went to this other house to just like be sick there, right? Like to continue her mourning. Like we know that she got black cloth, like she covered the windows there, but she was able to just be away from this and just like walk the grounds. And anyway, Mary's enemies made up stories about how she went there and she was just like partying all the time. But frankly, like she just, fresh air was good for her, a change of scenery was good for her. Like for her, like horse riding was useful. Like she did do things, but she wasn't like partying. But also,
Right, because when you're depressed and in shock, what you don't wanna be doing is sitting alone silently in a darkened room in the house where everything went wrong. Like, get outside, take a walk, like, get a drink of water, you'll be
no,
okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
And like grief works differently for different people, but people really wanted to judge her. They really wanted to think that she was responsible for this. So they were really thinking like she is happy about this. She helped organize this. Also, this trip that she took is the single one entry we have about her playing golf, which was really interesting to me because I thought going into this, it's like I knew that she like brought golf over from France and stuff, and I think she played various sports, but the only time that it was mentioned specifically she played golf was a guy who later criticized her, saying like she went to this house and she's playing like sports that women shouldn't play, like golf, and that's the only time that the word golf is mentioned by anyone about her ever. Anyway, so everyone knew that she was not doing well, really. People who knew her, like even Elizabeth, someone was like, oh, she's at this house and she's just like goofing off. And Elizabeth is like, no, she's not. Like, I've never met her. And I know that's not true. Like, I know that she's like convalescing from various illnesses and grieving. Like, even Elizabeth knew that. So then we get into some real pamphlet shenanigans. Okay, a poster. So February 16th, again, his murder was the 9th. By the 16th, a poster was found on the toll booth, I'm not sure what that is, in Edinburgh. And this poster claimed the assassins were Bothwell, Balfour, and 2 other guys.
I mean, 2 other is the only part there that's not quite accurate, like, and 200 others.
Yeah. Well, no, and I didn't list the 2 other guys' names because they were just kind of like, they don't really come up. They're not really, anyway, just 2 other guys. And so by this point, also, Lennox, Darnley's dad, had been told about the murder, but it wasn't until now, like several days later, that Darnley's mother, was told about it. If you might recall, she's been in jail in England ever since Lennox went to Scotland in the first place 2 years ago, because she's being held hostage because Elizabeth thought if Margaret Douglas was in jail, then Lennox and Darnley wouldn't secretly arrange a marriage to Mary, which they did. So Margaret Douglas has been in jail this whole time. And at first there was a misunderstanding. People thought that Lennox had also been killed. So Margaret Douglas freaked out, thinking her son and her husband were both dead. But then she found out it was just her son, but she's still really upset. And so much so that Elizabeth actually freed her from jail. And immediately, Margaret Douglas began stirring up shit, blaming Mary for the murder, saying that this was Mary's revenge for Darnley's role in the murder of Davy Rizzio. She was also mad Mary had not had Darnley buried with a pageantry of a state funeral, as befit the king. So she's really blaming Mary. So she's riding that hard. Meanwhile, her husband Lennox and his kinfolk are starting to really lean into the Bothwell of it all. So Elizabeth wrote a letter to Mary telling her, you need to find these murderers. People are saying you're involved. So you need to find the murderers and punish them to for your own reputation. Catherine de Medici wrote a similar letter saying to her credit, Catherine was like, it's good Darnley is dead because he was awful, but you need to find and prosecute the killers quickly to proclaim your own innocence in the eyes of your subjects, because the normal people loved Mary, and that's her big power here, right? And people are starting to doubt
All of
her.
the schemiest queens in Europe are like, listen, you gotta find these people or it's all gonna
Exactly. And Mary's like, I'm trying, but the investigators...
I've put my best sheriff on the case.
The investigators keep saying they can't find any evidence. Columbo's not here. There's no one she can ask. So she's doing what she can, my friends. Yeah. Who can she, what can she do? Anyway, so the night of February 26th, another poster went up. This one had a picture, so it had Mary's initials and also Bothwell's initials and the image of a mallet. I don't know exactly what that symbolism is, but Bothwell lost his mind at this. He said, someone tell me who made these posters because I will wash my hands with his blood. So not a way to convince people you're not a murderer is to say that. Every night posters went up, just night postering was happening. And so one of them said so Bothwell, remember, he had married Cocker the North's sister, Jean Gordon. And Jean Gordon was currently very ill. And this poster suggested that's because Bothwell was poisoning her because he wanted to marry Mary, the queen. So Mary is just in her, she's clearly emerging from her extreme shock fugue state. And she's just okay, I need someone to advise me here. So she tried to get Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart back in town, but he was busy scheming. So he had started a new Protestant/Catholic coalition. One of his co-conspirators in this was Jam Jam. And this group was working really hard to frame Bothwell for the murder that they had all also been involved in. So anyway, night postering kept continuing. Pictures of Bothwell, his face, and it said slogans like, here is the murderer of the king.
We love a clever slogan.
It's straightforward, to the point. And at this point, a ghostly figure prowled Edinburgh's streets calling out that Bothwell had murdered the king. So
I love both explanations for what could have happened here, which is that maybe ghosts are real. I don't know. Maybe Darnley was waiting for himself to be avenged. Or maybe one of those ladies who saw all of the people coming in and out of the house, put a sheet on and started waving their arms around ooh, I bet it was Bothwell.
Yeah.
Both of them are incredibly.
This is amazing. I love a ghostly figure prowling the streets. So basically everybody was everyone is very susceptible, right? It's giving mid-2000s Facebook conspiracy theories. Someone's well, I heard it was Bothwell. It was Bothwell. And suddenly everyone's it was Bothwell. Everyone just it's
except in this case, it actually was.
It was true. Yeah, exactly. But it's just that cascading where it's just everyone is so convinced of something. It's someone's well, I did see Bothwell's servants rolling barrels of gunpowder towards Kirk O'Field, a true thing that happened.
He did try to blame it on a crack of thunder.
Yeah.
Which seemed
true. Bothwell's just well, it was just, a weird crack of thunder. I know it didn't rain and it's February, but thunder? So the single-minded focus just on Bothwell, is evidence that it was just a group dedicated to bringing down Bothwell was behind this. And that was the group I just said, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, Jam Jam. They just needed they needed a fall guy, and Bothwell was the fall guy. They probably also wanted to drag Mary down as well because she was so connected with Bothwell because he had been her trusted advisor for so long. So Mary couldn't stop this runaway train. The more she tried to suppress the posters and rumors, the more people believed them to be true, and the more they thought that made her look guilty. So anyway, so she's just like, oh my God, like, can you guys find the killers, please? Like, this is getting really bad. And they're like, actually, our priority right now is finding out who's making the posters. And again, they are the ones making the posters.
Amazing.
Like, again, we know what happened. Mary didn't know what happened. And she firmly believed the explosion had been meant to murder her as well, because of course she would think that. Like, that makes sense. She thinks she only narrowly escaped by like not spending the night there. And so she thought this was meant to kill her and Darnley. And she's like, I know Bothwell is loyal to me. Ergo, Bothwell can't be behind this because he would never murder me. And that's like her train of thought. And Bothwell was like, I'm kind of running out of money. So can you give me some more titles that come with more money so I can have more money? And she's like, okay. And this was disastrous timing because it just looked like she was backing the prime suspect in the murder. And then the next night, I got Allison to bring this image up, and we're about to get into it. The most infamous poster went up. A sketch of it, made at the time, still exists and is kept in the National Archive in London. Allison, can you describe? This is the mermaid poster.
Okay, I will try. I have never seen this image before. It's amazing. So at the top of this poster is a bench, and on top of the bench is a topless mermaid, tits out in the air, holding a scroll in one hand and what looks like a Venus flytrap in the other. It's got MR next to it, Mary's initials, and then underneath the mermaid is what I think is a goat surrounded by 3 circles and a shit ton of swords. And I don't know what any of this is supposed to mean.
But apparently this was the most provocative poster anyone made. And apparently everyone in Edinburgh knew immediately what it all meant. So I'll explain.
Okay, please, because this is quite a look.
I don't know if everyone in Edinburgh actually understood what it meant. I think you get, it's like, it's saying something bad about Mary, right? Like,
I assume she is the tits out mermaid doing something slutty and bad.
Yeah.
I got that.
Okay, so it depicts a bare-breasted mermaid wearing a crown. She is waving what is maybe a sea anemone or maybe a feathered lure used in falconry. Either way, like a sea anemone is a symbol for female genitalia and the feathered lure used in falconry. Anyway, it insinuates seduction, whatever she's waving around. Written alongside the mermaid are the initials MR, which stands for like Maria Regina, like Mary the Queen. Below the mermaid is a crouching hare, so like a rabbit.
Okay, not a goat.
Yeah, enclosed by 3 circles. The outer circle has 17 daggers around its rim. Above the hare are the initials JH for James Hepburn, Bothwell's name. So, okay, this is from one of the books. So, the image preserves the public conjoining of Mary and Bothwell in an accusation of adultery. For even those with a minimal grasp of the meaning of the symbols, its message would have been clear. But it's in case it's not. So I'll explain further. The hare is a device on Bothwell's coat of arms. So it's like one of the heraldic images of like the Hepburn family, I guess. So like that indicates him. He's the hare. But it also symbolized fear, and its portrayal was intended as a threat. A mermaid was a familiar symbol denoting temptation, but the mermaid in this image has a forked tail, denoting prostitution. The circle of daggers, like the explanations are getting more and more niche. Like this was written by somebody who just like, went to university, read the really weird books, and assumes everyone knows all the things they know. Level symbolism. Okay, so the circle of daggers has a very niche explanation. It's paired in. Okay, so there's this obscure book that's just kind of like, here's what images and what they mean in like ancient Rome or something. So it's like this book shows the circle of daggers, and in this book, the circle of daggers is next to the motto, "The sword shall destroy them from without and terror within." So this is assuming other people have read that book and know that the circle of daggers in this other book has that quote next to it. The number of 17 daggers may come from an ancient Roman text explaining that that's an unlucky number. So,
okay, which I'm sure everyone
someone just really overthought this. But also, it's interesting, and maybe a coincidence and maybe not, somebody knew that in that will that Mary wrote when she thought she was going to die in childbirth, she bequeathed Bothwell a jeweled mermaid. So it might be someone who knew mermaid was like their secret shared thing. ultimately, this poster is just being like, Mary is a slut. She and Bothwell are having an affair, and they killed Darnley together. So I just find it interesting that this poster was like the worst one. This is like the one that made Mary panic. Like this poster of this mermaid and daggers. Anyway, so Mary acted quickly because she's like, this poster is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. So she convened a gathering of the city's painters and writers to be like, whose art style is this? Whose handwriting is this? Like to try and figure out who did it. Suspicion fell on this one guy, but he fled before he could be arrested. So then she passed an act in Parliament saying anyone who is found putting up posters, slanderous material would face prosecution and execution. But the damage had been done. So the poster campaign had really made everybody suspect Bothwell, but also her. And just as a coda, because we're wrapping up this part of the story. So the crisis at this point was so extreme that Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart couldn't avoid town anymore. So he came back to town. And just to recap, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, if we think back to all the major crises that have happened during Mary's reign, the Cock of the North scenario, the chase about raids, the murder of Davy Rizzio, the murder of Darnley, they had all happened because of him, basically. And because he wanted more power and to eliminate his enemies. So it made sense that Bothwell was the fall guy because Bothwell had taken up more power in the absence of Davy Rizzio and Darnley, like Bothwell. So of course that's the next guy Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart wanted to take down. And Mary just kept refusing to proceed against like everyone was like, you need to put Bothwell on trial for this. And she's like, how can I do that? He's the sheriff. But the more she protected him, like she felt absolutely sure, like everyone around her was constantly betraying her, but she was like, this guy has had my back, like I'm not going to turn on him. But the more she supported him, the more the public, which had always been this thing that supported her, turned against her. And so potentially in like a William Cecil long-term planning way, maybe that's part of what Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart had wanted all along, to make the murder look so weirdly suspicious and point the finger at Bothwell to bring him and her down. So I'm going to leave us all in suspense for now. But next week, we will continue what happens next. Elson, do you have any thoughts about anything? The posters? Anything about the murder?
I just my favorite part of this entire story is how unprofessional and bad at schemes everyone involved in it is. I just like when you describe this in just a couple of words, where like the King of Scotland was assassinated by a group of his like advisors on the Privy Council, and like it sounds very um Game of Thronesy. Like they had planned this out 45 steps in advance. And I just love getting under the hood here and watching just, oh no, it's really dumb. And after that, we were putting up a bunch of political cartoons in the town square, and everyone was, like, chasing each other around, and maybe there was, like, a ghost impersonator happening.
It's just,
I just
yeah, I
yeah.
don't know. I think it's also like the number of conspirators, both in the Rizzio murder and in this one. It's like, the bigger a committee is, the messier your like annual report becomes. So I think it's just so many people were involved in this. Like, of course, because someone is like, we should blow up the house. Yes. And we should also strangle him. Also, like, it's too many
They
people.
really yes-anded their way out of a good murder here. Yeah, there's too many cooks.
It's way too complicated. And that's the thing. It's like, who could outsmart people this bad at scheming? Like,
Personally, this might be me being a Mary fangirl. That's very possible,
mhm.
but I think the reason that she's, like it's very easy from our perspective now to be like, "Mary, oh my god, look at what's happening. How can you not see that it was him? Why are you still believing in these people?" She's a good schemer.
Yeah,
She's like she thinks it's an attack on her because she's thinking 3, 4 steps ahead. She can't imagine that it's actually this stupid.
yeah, right. It's the Benoit Blanc glass onion. Yeah,
She's thinking way too hard. She's like, "No, it's gotta be somebody else. That would be stupid." I'm like, "No, no, no, honey. That's actually what's
it
happening.
is.
Everyone around you is a moron."
Yeah. Yeah, it's just such a weird cavalcade of events, and this is where, like, the first even of this podcast, it's like, okay, this episode takes place over the course of 2 years. And this one is like over the course of like 1 month, everything
Yeah.
like just devolves into chaos. And next week, similar, but no spoilers for people who don't know the story yet. So, Allison, thank you again for joining me to talk about the weird demise of a man who you hated.
It's a great catharsis episode for me now that Darnley is gone. I assume none of your listeners will miss him.
He was just like, he came in like a wrecking ball in a bad way. Just
Yeah.
everything was really fucked up and bad, and he just kind of like made it all worse. And then he died, and
He was the problem.
and he
At every moment of his life, he was.
and he was like 21. And one of the things I read as well said like the level of syphilis, like the advancedness of how again, if you have syphilis, see a doctor, get antibiotics, very treatable nowadays. But the level of syphilis that he had, like the mercury bath maybe helped get rid of his pustules, but like he was probably going to die within the next year anyway. So all of this could have been avoided. But also, that's what I was thinking about. It's like, if you're like this group of 500 people who are like, we're going to kill Darnley, it's like, oh, he's really sick and convalescing. Let's poison him.
This is not the easiest way to do it, is to fill the basement of an entire house with gunpowder. You were already in the house to lock all the doors. You could have just walked into the room.
He had no guards. And that's the thing too. That's where I feel like the committee of it all, it's like this guy came in, this mercenary explosive expert. So I feel like they're all like, great, we're going to kill Darnley. And then someone's like, hey, I just met this guy at the pub. He says you can do this shit with gunpowder. They're like, yes, that's great, bro. Yeah, let's use gunpowder too. It's like, they only use that because that one guy came in who's like, oh, if you put gunpowder in a house, you can blow up a house. And I was like, can you?
Amazing.
Let's do it. Yeah. Okay. So Allison, please let everybody know about your books and how people can follow you and things like that.
Sure. So I'm the author of 2 historical fiction novels, one out and available for purchase right now called A Tip for the Hangman. It was a historical thriller set in the Mary Queen of Scots era. Second one is
Oh, no, I just want to say, like, your book is set in the Mary Queen of Scots era. And when we get to the part in the story where your book is, like, we'll mention that. But, like, there's so much spy shit going on in this story, right? Like, William Cecil's got his spies, Mary's got his spies, just spies everywhere. The spy who only draws graphic novels, like, spies. And your book is, like, Mary Queen of Scots era, spy shit. Like...
Yes, I extremely regret not making my book a graphic novel in the style of that one Spies.
Make your book just be one big picture?
Yes, all happening at the same time with a giant out of proportion Darnley in the corner.
Yes.
%.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you have another book that's coming up that people can pre-order.
Yes, you can pre-order my second book. It's called Let the Dead Bury the Dead. It is out in October. You can also find me on the internet if you search my name. I'm around.
And is there not AllisonEpstein.com or something?
There is. That would be your once I update that website to be accurate to the present moment, that will have all.
Oh, wait, but also talk about your newsletter, because you did a 2-part Darnley special in your newsletter.
I did, yes. My Substack is called Dirtbags Through the Ages. It is what it says on the tin. It's terrible, terrible people in history. My most popular issue of the Substack is my 2-part Darnley special. So if you're looking for a place to start, you can listen to... Anne and I have now talked about Darnley for, I think, upwards of 4 hours. You can get my more concise thoughts on Darnley in about 2,000
But also,
words.
you've got all the good pictures. You don't have the mermaid picture, but you do have other good pictures there.
Well, now I wish I might have to go back and add
the mermaid picture, but that's like, because your thing ends when Darnley dies. A mermaid picture is more appropriate were you to write about Bothwell, for instance. Not saying he's a dirtbag, but I mean, stay tuned for next week.
We shall see. We shall
We'll
see
what he ends up doing. I think it's so, again, just like that episode of Columbo. It was so silly watching this guy trying to cover up his own crime while Columbo was investigating it. And Columbo knew from minute one that this guy was the killer and he was just setting him up. But in this, there's not the Columbo figure. It's just Bothwell being like, well, I'm just going to investigate this crime. I did. Guess it was thunder. Oh, you don't believe that? He's bad. Everyone's bad at schemes. And that's...
If there is a Columbo in this story, though, it's Cecil.
Yes. Yes. Peter Falk is William Cecil. Definitely. Or I don't know. Maybe the guy who drew the picture is the Columbo.
I think that guy deserves his own show. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe for next time I'll try and find what the guy's name was, because that picture is outstanding. again, the pictures. So yeah, if you want to follow this podcast and see the pictures of things we've been describing, if you go to Instagram, I'm at Vulgar History Pod. I put up a little post with pictures every week. And then also I'm on TikTok at Vulgar History. And if you go to vulgarhistory.com, you can get transcriptions of the most recent episodes. If you go into the episode, there'll be a little thing to click on to get the transcriptions. And those transcriptions are by Aveline Malik from The Wordery. And I have a store, vulgarhistory.com/store is where you go to get merch if you're in the US. It just works better for that. And then if you're not in the US, if you're international, vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. I also have merch there. And honestly, I'm thinking like, what's our new merch going to be for American of Scots? Like from last time we have the like, You're My Tortoise, R.I.P. Davy Rizzio memorial. From this, I don't know. Do we want to have the Tits Out Mermaid? I don't know. I'm not sure.
I kind of want like a Starbucks cup that's got the Tits Up Mermaid on it, but we might get sued for copyright
The
infringement.
Tits Out Mermaid, like
So-
the first thing I thought of when I saw it was the Starbucks mermaid. Like she's got that sort of vibe. I don't know. But you know what? Tits Out Brigade, all the best ideas for merch comes from you. So let me know what you think. What else? Oh yeah, Patreon. I have a Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter, that's where you can get early ad-free access to all of the episodes, including if you join at the $5 or more level, you get episodes of Vulgar Priest Theater, which is where Allison, who you've been listening to me talk with, and our friend Lana Wood Johnson, we talk about costume dramas. Where I live, honestly, it's just like pouring rain. It feels very like evocative for all the weird murders we've been talking about. And then a mighty blast of thunder and a house will explode or something.
Gotta be careful.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, Allison. Next week, I'm going to be back, and I believe you're going to be back, and we're going to be talking about what happened next in this like increasingly unhinged, chaotic story of this woman who honestly just like deserves to be able to just like go to a spa and chill for like 5 years.
Honestly.
She just give her a break. My God, like can everything calm
Needs
down?
a vacation so badly. And if y'all think the story is off the rails now.
Yeah. Oh,
Whew.
just wait. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, Allison, and everyone. Keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Ann Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Welcome to the small town of Chinook, where faith runs deep and secrets run deeper. In this new thriller, religion and crime collide when a gruesome murder rocks the isolated Montana community. Everyone is quick to point their fingers at a drug-addicted teenager, but local deputy Ruth Vogel isn't convinced. She suspects connections to a powerful religious group. Enter federal agent V.B. Lauro, who has been investigating a local church for possible criminal activity. The pair form an unlikely partnership to catch the killer, unearthing secrets that leave Ruth torn between her duty to the law, her religious convictions, and her very own family. But something more sinister than murder is afoot, and someone is watching Ruth. Chinook, starring Kelly Marie Tran and Sanaa Lathan. Listen to Chinook wherever you get your podcasts.
With your long-forgotten name, we call upon you.
We call upon you.
In the words of the unspeakable language, we call upon you.
We call upon you.
By the spilt blood of the wicked, who walk upon this world, sprouting the words of false idols, we call upon you.
We call upon you.
On the land of the dead harvest, that which brings the earth itself into your service, Yamal, we call upon you.
We call upon you. We call upon you. We call upon you.
Yamal calls upon you.
The Sprouting, a Call of Cthulhu actual play podcast by Blighthouse Studio. Find us on your podcatcher of choice.